thank you, Tommy, Noah, and Elliot. It's one thing to be world class at something, another thing to be able to explain it to a bunch of people. So good job, guys. All right, our final seminar of the evening is coming to us from Aidan Bartlett. And he is talking to us about how to remember what it feels like to improve. Aidan is coming to us from Bonnie Lake, Washington, near Seattle. And he is a 4-time North American record holder in Square One and was the 2019 Square One World Champion. And I'll give him a second to come up here.
All right, can we have everyone in the room who is named Mike please stand up? All right, that concludes the mic check. Thank you. I'm sitting down because if it looks like I'm reading off a script, I definitely am. All right. A couple months ago, I was ready to give up. I understand that's a very melodramatic way to begin a seminar about solving Rubik's Cubes, but I unfortunately could not come up with a different hook for this. I've been cubing for about 7 years now, and it's starting to feel like I was past my prime at only 18 years old. Practicing began to feel more and more like a chore whenever it was that I could get myself to even practice, and the results I was seeing in competition were not anywhere close to where I'd wanted to be at years ago. I think that my lull in cubing was very easy to chalk up to COVID and the lack of competitions for motivation, and this was of course part of it, but possibly more damaging was my unhealthy mindset and practice regimen. Over my 7 years of cubing, I've spent almost 3/4 of it exclusively practicing Square One. Ever since mid to late 2017, I almost completely dropped any other events I was doing to focus all of my energy on Square One. Square One was, and still is for most people, a very easy event to improve at. If you're blessed with naturally good turning and an intuitive sense at how to apply that turning into solves, you will see results very, very quickly. This was exactly my situation, and my 13-year-old self saw this as an opportunity to start farming podiums. I loved the feeling of improvement. There was almost nothing more satisfying to myself than looking at my own WCA profile and seeing the dramatic drop in times that I had in the event over the course of that first year of dedicated practice. I'm sure some of you can already see how this is going to end up, but bear with my story for a bit longer. The following year, I became the first North American to be ahead of Brandon Lin, who is still here tonight, maybe? I don't know. Now, I became the first North American to be ahead of Brandon Lin, who is one of the greatest Square One solvers of all time, in over 3 years after netting an 8.17 North American record average in the event. I was over the moon. I cannot recall a time I was more excited for anything, ever, and my mom actually had to have me take a walk with her to calm down after that, because I was just that stoked. I held that record for all of 8 days. That was rough. I beat a record that stood for over 2.5 years, and it got whisked away from me in barely over a week. And here's where I now say that my mindset became a bit twisted. Competing and practicing was no longer about improving my own results. Rather, it was rather about getting ahead of someone. I was drunk off the feeling of having a record, and I wanted to become intoxicated off that feeling once more. I went on to break the North American record 3 more times over the course of the next 1.5 years. I improved my world ranking from somewhere to around 15th to 3rd in the world, and I even managed to win the World Championships for Square One in 2019. Not a bad track record, but I was never able to completely satisfy the itch that I got from my first NAR. I was now chasing that dragon, and the only way I thought I could do it was if I managed to get a world record average. An unfortunate +2 at the end of my last NAR average to date cost me an average that would have placed me 2nd in the world, which would have gotten me one step closer to my ultimate goal. Sure, 3rd place is nothing to sneeze at, and I'm incredibly lucky to be able to even say that's where I peaked, but I was crushed nonetheless. The thought of only having to climb up 1 more rank to reach my goal made everything much more tangible, but I carelessly let that slip. The average I ended up getting was 0.01 better than my previous record, and it served as a cool reminder of what I was capable of. I used that as motivation, and the attention I got from others who also believed I was capable of the world record felt really nice, admittedly. Unfortunately, as I was beginning to completely refine my turning and solving style, Every competition in the world got canceled. At the time, we didn't know how long this would go on, so I was actually kind of stoked. Getting to be at home all the time meant that I could practice pretty much nonstop, and I figured that this might have been just what I needed to hopefully do something great when the time would come for me to compete again. I started live streaming most of, if not all of my practice sessions to www.twitch.tv/Aiden_Bartlett, where I was putting up some really, really good times. Day after day, I was getting averages of 12 that were routinely below what the current world record average of 5 was at the time, and I was getting averages of 5 that were more than a second faster. It became apparent to a lot of people, myself included, that I was probably the fastest square one solver in the world for a short period of time. Some of you probably just checked out as I said that and immediately started thinking to yourself how cocky I was sounded there, and that was not without reason. I was cocky. As humble as I tried to sound to others, at the time I genuinely believed that I was the fastest in the world. And what 15-year-old wouldn't if the people who watched his dumb Rubik's Cube Twitch streams were echoing the same thought? I was no longer practicing to improve, but rather to stay at a good enough speed so that I would be able to stay at that self-proclaimed spot by the time I got to compete again. After like 4 to 5 months of not competing, the thrill of maintaining this position wore off. And I started to go some days without practicing for the first time in forever. It eventually just stopped altogether. That's the end of that very long-winded way of saying I plateaued and then cubing was stopped being fun. I'm now going to start diagnosing what I think went wrong with my own practice, as well as how I got out of what, well, was probably a 2-year slump. I'll try and offer some advice as well to hopefully help you all prevent this situation and what you can do if you find yourself in it. As a disclaimer, all information that I will be sharing is anecdotal, and this is just what worked or didn't work for me. Some things may be motivating to you that aren't to others, but I believe that my situation may feel very similar to a lot of top cubers who have ended up quitting in the past. So I believe that the evidence, or the advice I provide should be of some help to you, almost all of you. Let's start by taking a look at what went wrong with my own routine. The first and most obvious thing is that I was not practicing to improve my own results. However, much of the time, I was practicing to break records. Any top cuber can probably tell you how much more pressure they feel to do well when they're at a level where they expect themselves to be able to break records. For me, months before I got my first North American record, I already believed that I was more than capable of it, and that put a lot of unnecessary pressure on myself both when practicing and competing. It obviously added to comp nerves, but more importantly, it gave me a number to beat when practicing that was entirely made in my head. Every session I did was to test if I could consistently get averages below 8.45 seconds, which was the North American record at the time. Not to see if I could improve the total session as it was compared to the day or week before. Tangible goals are a good thing, but it's unhealthy to compare yourself to that goal and consider anything that doesn't meet it a failed attempt. Just because you think you are capable of a certain result does not mean you are bound to get it off of that thought alone. The second thing I was doing that was wrong was both expecting and accepting a plateau in my improvement. I stopped caring as to whether or not I would see any gradual decrease in my times as long as they were staying below a fixed marker I had previously set for myself. At my peak, that was probably around 6.6 or 6.7 seconds on square one, and as long as I can consistently put up averages below that time, I was happy. The big issue with this is that it forced me into a state of not looking for areas in which I could improve at. There were still cases I'd get, especially in the PBL step of the cube, where I wouldn't know a very efficient way to solve it and would just hope that my fast running would be enough to carry me through the rest of the solve without losing too much time. It would not have been difficult to sit down, assess which cases I had the most trouble with, and play around until I found a solution that I could execute quickly without needing to think too much, while at the same time being much more efficient. At the very least, this would have reduced the amount of bad solves I got, simply due to bad cases. This is an especially important thing for square one solvers to work on, considering the final step of the most popular advanced method has just shy of 1,000 separate cases. But the same logic can be very easily applied to any other event. 3x3 F2L, for example, is a stage that even a lot of fast cubers claim to struggle with, and have cases that they hate. There is fortunately a lot of flexibility to this step, and taking a case from a different approach may make it for a much more comfortable solution that can drastically reduce bad times due to unlucky cases. Finally, this is probably the most relatable thing for cubers of all skills. I put all of my eggs into one basket. All of my time practicing was with square one. I hardly diversified because of any time that I tried practicing another event, I either grew quickly frustrated that I wasn't as good as I'd once been before, or it was just boring to do an event that I didn't think I was going to get good at. At times, there were events that I would see fast people do and think, wow, that looks really fun. But when I would try them out myself, I was so far removed from the idea of being mediocre at an event that I would stop after a few solves. It was as if I was upset that I didn't sponge up all the skill that solver had after watching one YouTube video. This led to a very annoying sequence of trying an event, deeming myself too hopeless to really give it a chance, and then just going back to square one solves. Evidently, the biggest issue with this way of practicing is that it's boring. Day after day, I would practice the same event without even hoping to improve because I had resigned myself to that speed I'd achieved, even though I knew that there was more I could work on. If that sounds really boring to you, that's because it was. Obviously, I almost quit. There was absolutely no heart left in my practice, so I just started playing Minecraft a lot instead. So now you know what I think went wrong, but I obviously wouldn't be telling you all this if there wasn't something that snapped me back into my love for cubing. And what that random spark was that I had at my last competition, Schools Out PLU 2022. At this competition, I got my, at the time, overall PB 4x4 single, which was a 30.69. This was remarkably close in my eyes to the 30-second barrier I had wanted to someday cross 5 years ago. So I made a bet with myself. After this competition, I'll practice 4x4 a bit, get a sub 30 single, then call it a day. I figured I'd accomplish one goal I had a long time ago as a way to end on a high note and then just stop. It took me 4 or 5 days to accomplish this goal, but I was well aware before that point that I was absolutely not going to end up quitting. Somewhere along the line, I started having fun with cubing again. It was almost the same feeling I had when I was 13 and discovered that I had some potential in this weird Square One event. Did I mention that my main event is Square One? What changed though? Why did this hobby that was starting to feel so monotonous and chore-like suddenly become something that I was it suddenly became the only thing I was thinking about again? And I think the answer to that is simple, and it's that I was starting to improve again. In my quest to get a sub 34x4 single, I started working on the flaws I was able to quickly identify in my solving. I managed to get my turning more consistent on this unfamiliarly sized cube to me, and I finally remembered what it felt like to improve. In doing so, I was able to rekindle my passion for other events as well, and it made much more apparent to me what my flaws and bad habits I needed to work on were. Now, suppose you didn't heed any of my warnings, or you were already feeling the same way that I've just described beforehand. I have some tips that I think may help you. And the first is to obviously diversify your events. I don't think I need to get into it too much more since I already talked about this a while ago, but I promise you that it will help. Even if you have the same struggle as I did, where you have trouble practicing events, even if you don't think you have any talent in them, push through this. You will see some improvement, and that will, I assume, feel good on a pretty deeply rooted psychological level. The second is to be honest with yourself. Something I found during this is that I would frequently lie to myself about how I would be able to quickly get back to where I used to be with just a week or two of practice. As I started attending competitions again, I quickly found out that this was not the case. I would basically only try and get my times back down the week before the competition, and as you can maybe guess, that did not work. I was far below my peak, and unless I wanted to keep lying to myself about that, I was going to have to face the truth and actually work on stuff to improve. And finally, my last and possibly most important piece of advice I can give you, and what I think will be the biggest help to anyone in this state, is to keep going to competitions. With the big asterisk, of course, that you have the disposable income and time to do so. A lot can happen at one competition. You can see an inspiring performance from somebody. You can unexpectedly break a personal best, which just might motivate you to keep working on an event. And maybe you'll just meet your new best friend. It might not happen in one competition, it might not even happen in 10. But I assure you that something can and will happen if you keep going to competitions. And with that, I am done. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Do we have, yeah.
What do you do for OC PBL?
Next question.
Hello.
Hello.
What is your biggest goal in the future of cubing?
My biggest goal at this moment is just to keep improving, and that's kind of what the whole point of this was. I think that for a very, very long time, I only had goals that were related to records or or getting big competition titles like this one, or worlds, stuff like that. So I think that just now, I'm pretty happy with just improving and seeing myself do better in multiple events.
wondering whether you considered organizing competitions as a way of basically keeping in touch with cubing and kind of taking a break if you're overwhelmed from practicing.
I guess something a lot of people do, so I think that that was kind of my own mindset for a while. I was still competing, even though I wasn't expecting to really do well. I might have been lying to myself saying that I still had potential, that I could still get lucky and do well, but I really wasn't practicing enough to make any of that come true. So I think in my own head, just keeping going to competitions was kind of a way to, at the very least, keep myself involved in cubing. So I think that that was probably what ended up helping. I kind of talk about this where at one competition, randomly I broke a overall PB in 4x4, and that kind of rekindled my spirit for cubing.
One last question, anyone? We'll go back here.
So when I was going for Skubnar and I'd see it make big jumps, it would demotivate me at times. So I wanted to know, in your experience, did seeing other people improve the records you were going for make you more or less motivated to keep pushing yourself?
I think for like a little while, it always made me a little bit less motivated. I think specifically during COVID, when David Epstein broke the square one world record, when Australia was able to compete before everybody else again, that was very, very disheartening to me because I felt like that was something that I thought I deserved for a while, which was a very destructive mindset, of course. But I thought I deserved that, and it was very disheartening that somebody who just had the opportunity to compete got it before me. So I was upset for a little while, but eventually I got past that, and I think for a little bit it did motivate me again, but that wasn't enough to keep going. So it took a while to get back into that actually good mindset of continuing practicing.
Awesome, thanks Aiden.
Thank you.
And that wraps up our evening. Thanks to all of you for coming and engaging with the seminars. Thanks to those of you who tuned in on the live stream. And